Gangs have existed for centuries and continue to thrive in many parts of the world, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. From drug trafficking to extortion and murder, gangs have been involved in a range of criminal activities that have put the safety of communities at risk. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at the 5 horrific crimes committed by gang members that illustrate the ruthlessness and brutality of these organizations. Join us as we delve into the dark world of gang violence and explore the devastating consequences that result from these criminal organizations. This is a video you won't want to miss. Also, let us know in the comment who do you think is the most dangerous gang member from these cases. Number 5. Abel Gallegos. Abel Gallegos' actions led to a heinous crime that resulted in the kidnapping and murder of Simon Duran. Gallegos, along with 2 other individuals, were found guilty of multiple counts for their role in the brutal slaying of Duran. Their actions were motivated by revenge, as Duran had identified one of them in an attempted slaying investigation. What followed was a gruesome sequence of events that eventually led to Duran's untimely demise. Gallegos had reached out to Duran through social media and arranged a meeting at a house in Denver. Duran, Gallegos, and another person left the house together. It was at this point that Gallegos took Duran to a parking lot where they met with one of the accomplices who physically attacked Duran and imprisoned her in the back seat of a vehicle. The trio then drove to a secluded spot in Golden where they brutally shot Duran 10 times. If that was not enough, Gallegos and Rosales later returned to the scene of Duran's death and poured gasoline on her body before setting it on fire. It was a truly barbaric act that left the community in shock and horror. What made matters worse was the fact that this was not Gallegos' first brush with the law. He had already been convicted 5 times before and had been on parole or probation 8 times. The sentencing judge, Philip McNulty, was appalled by the casualness of the crime and disregard for human life. As a result, Gallegos was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 163 years for his role in the heinous crime. It was a fitting punishment for someone who had shown such utter contempt for the value of human life.
This is the result. This is where you will end up, with your family and friends crying as you're...
Number 4. Christopher Dean Case. The case of Christopher Dean is a chilling reminder of the brutal consequences of gang violence and witness intimidation. Christopher was invited to the home of 2 individuals in Atlanta, unaware that he was being lured to his death. He was greeted by members of the Gangster Disciples, a notorious gang known for its violent activities. Christopher Lockett, one of the gang members, was the mastermind behind the plan to torture and kill Christopher Dean. What followed was a gruesome display of violence and cruelty. Christopher Dean was subjected to an hour-long beating with a 2x4 and a crowbar before being sodomized with a handle-like object. He was then shot twice in the back of his head, execution style. The gang members, satisfied with their heinous act, put his body in the trunk of a car and abandoned it at a MARTA station in Atlanta. The motive behind the killing was to set an example for other potential witnesses to discourage them from cooperating with the police. The Gangster Disciples wanted to make it clear that they would not tolerate anyone who betrayed their code of silence. However, their plan was foiled when a jury convicted 5 people involved in the slaying, and they were all sentenced to life in prison. Christopher Dean's death was a senseless act of violence that took a young man's life and devastated his family. It also highlighted the need to combat gang violence and witness intimidation, which can have a far-reaching impact on the community as a whole. The case serves as a reminder of the importance of standing up against violence and working together to create a safer and more just society.
It sends a big message to us that we need to do something.
Number 3. 2 brothers, Anthony Carpio and Michael Stephen Carpio. On January 23, 2013, 2 teenage boys, one of them being Anthony Carpio, attacked a fellow student at Cleveland High School in Reseda, California. The victim, identified as 17-year-old Kevin Orellano, was a member of a rival gang, and the Carpio brothers targeted him because of his affiliation. The brothers confronted Orellano in the school's main hallway, and a fight broke out. During the altercation, Anthony Carpio pulled out a knife and stabbed Orellano several times in the chest, while his brother Michael held him down. Despite efforts by the school staff and paramedics, Orellano died from his injuries. The Carpio brothers were arrested and charged with murder and assault with a deadly weapon. In March 2017, Anthony Carpio was found guilty of second-degree murder, and Michael Stephen Carpio was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Both brothers were sentenced to life in prison, with Anthony receiving a minimum of 16 years and Michael receiving a minimum of 15 years. The case shocked the community and raised concerns about gang violence in schools. In response, the Los Angeles Unified School District implemented additional safety measures, including the installation of metal detectors and the hiring of additional security personnel at high-risk schools.
Shocked to see his disfigured face.
Step up.
Number 2. MS-13 members. In 2017, a brutal and senseless crime shocked the community of Maryland when 2 members of the notorious MS-13 gang brutally murdered a 14-year-old girl named Ariana Funes Diaz. Josu Rafael Fuentes Ponce and Joel Ernesto Escobar lured the victim into the woods and subjected her to a horrific ordeal. They raped her, beat her with a baseball bat, and then stabbed her to death. The motive behind the murder was believed to be the initiation into the gang, which required the members to commit a heinous crime. The 2 men were eventually arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and Fuentes Ponce was additionally charged with participating in a gang resulting in death. They faced a long and grueling trial, during which the details of the heinous crime were laid bare for all to hear. The jury ultimately found them guilty, and they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case shed light on the brutality and senselessness of gang violence and the need for tougher laws and measures to combat it. It also served as a reminder of the innocent lives that are lost to the gang culture and the devastation that it causes to the families and communities of the victims.
Conspired and agreed that they were going to kill our murder victim out of fear that she was going to go to the police department.
The attack was brutal. Officers say the teen was killed with a machete and a baseball bat.
Number 1. El Salvadorian gang members. The case of the El Salvadorian gang members is undoubtedly one of the most heinous and heart-wrenching crimes in recent history. In 2016, the 5 gang members brutally murdered 4 young women and 2 children in what can only be described as a cold-blooded and calculated attack. The victims ranged in age from 16 months to 18 years old and were killed because they refused to join the gang. The gang members first sexually assaulted the women, then killed them, and finally killed the children to eliminate any witnesses. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves across the country and the world, leading to an outpouring of international condemnation and calls for justice. Despite the heinousness of the crime, the families of the victims and the authorities in El Salvador refused to be cowed by the gang members' violence. They launched a full-scale investigation into the case, which eventually led to the capture and conviction of the 5 gang members responsible for the murders. The gang members were sentenced to 390 years in prison each, the maximum penalty allowed under Salvadoran law. The sentencing was seen as a victory for the families of the victims and for those fighting against gang violence in El Salvador. However, it was also a stark reminder of the violence and brutality that continues to plague the country and the difficult work that lies ahead in the fight against gang violence. Thank you for watching this video on the most heinous and shocking gang-related crimes. It is important to remember the devastating impact that gang violence can have on communities and individuals. By raising awareness of these cases, we can work towards preventing future tragedies. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more content like this. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for your support.
A frightening image inside a prison in El Salvador, and President Nayib Bukele wants the world to see.